Inside a factory cell, a robotic arm swings rapidly through its program cycle as movement enters its operating zone at the wrong moment. At a demolition site, repeated hammering at the base of a structural pillar shifts its stability until the upper section suddenly loosens and drops without warning. At a narrow facility gate, a mobile crane slowly edges out into the roadway with limited visibility, just as a bus approaches and quickly occupies the exit space. Forklift moves forward carrying long concrete poles when the load suddenly shifts, tipping and dropping into an active work zone without warning. On a roadside, a fallen pole lies tangled in overhead cables. When contact occurs, electrical current rapidly energizes the metal, turning it into a live hazard. Don't touch or attempt to move objects entangled with power lines. Always assume they are live and isolate the source first. In a narrow work area, an excavator carefully lifts a heavy concrete ring beside nearby workers when the suspended load suddenly begins to swing and moves unexpectedly into the working space. Never, ever stand beneath or beside a suspended load. Always stay outside the swing radius of lifting equipment. In an underground garage, a worker rushes forward to stop a moving SUV, while the vehicle continues forward, narrowing the space between two parked cars into a tightening pinch zone. Never, ever attempt to stop a moving vehicle yourself. Maintain distance and use controlled methods to halt motion. On a dimly lit road, a tractor moves slowly across the lane when a speeding lorry suddenly closes the distance from behind with little time to react. Use proper visibility controls, warning signals, and traffic separation when operating slow-moving equipment on active roads. Ensure other drivers can clearly see and respond in time. On a drilling rig floor, a suspended man cage is guided near rotating equipment and used for movement when it suddenly shifts and falls back to the ground. Keep personnel and suspended platforms clear of active rotating or energized equipment. Ensure systems are fully stopped and isolated before approaching the work zone. Inside a moving truck, the driver becomes focused on his phone for a moment too long as the vehicle begins to drift and swerve across the road. Keep full attention on the road at all times while driving. Avoid device use to maintain control and awareness of vehicle movement. In a narrow yard, a moving forklift advances toward a parked pickup, while the space between them rapidly narrows into a closing pinch zone. Avoid positioning yourself between moving vehicles, maintain a safe distance, and allow controlled methods to manage vehicle movement and stopping. On a construction site, a neatly leaning stack is disturbed by removing a single board, triggering a sudden shift as the structure loses its balance. Treat leaning stacks as unstable and secure them. Before handling, disturbing one part can release hidden imbalance across the entire structure. On an oil field drilling floor, an open mouse hole remains exposed behind an active work area, positioned just outside the visible working zone. Cover or clearly mark all floor openings before work begins. Maintain awareness of your surroundings to prevent stepping into unseen hazards. In an industrial yard during a hose drill, a charged hose builds internal pressure when the force suddenly surges and the line reacts with rapid, uncontrolled motion. Handle charged hoses with controlled positioning and proper support. Anticipate pressure changes and maintain a stable stance to manage sudden force. On a construction frame, elevated timber supports carry a temporary load when a single support wire suddenly fails and the entire structure begins to drop away unexpectedly. Never, ever depend on a single temporary support. If it fails, everything above it goes with it. At a delivery bay, a stacked column becomes unstable as one crate is removed until the shifting load suddenly tips outward as the structure loses balance. Never, ever pull from a stacked load without securing the rest. Movement transfers through the entire structure and can quickly destabilize everything around it. On a narrow wooden bridge over a canal, unsecured planks shift and lose support until the surface suddenly collapses as its structure fails. Inspect and secure walking surfaces before use. Avoid stepping onto loose or partially supported structures that can shift without warning. A suspended load hangs above a building, drifting slightly, until it suddenly shifts and loses support, transitioning into an uncontrolled vertical drop. Keep people and assets clear of suspended loads at all times. Establish exclusion zones to prevent exposure to falling hazards. Along a narrow trench edge, ground stability is weakened by disturbance until the unsupported edge suddenly fails without warning. Ensure stable footing and verify edge support before cutting or loading material. Unsupported edges can fail suddenly when disturbed. On the oil rig floor, a suspended assembly loses support above the drill line, transitioning instantly into a vertical drop with no resistance. Stay clear of the drop zone around suspended drill equipment. Maintain a safe distance and position yourself outside any potential vertical fall path. The load is held by tension in the hoisting system. When that support fails or releases, gravity accelerates it vertically with no resistance. If it can fall, it will fall fast. Stay out of the drop zone. Distance is your only protection. On an unfinished rooftop, wet mix is steadily added from a suspended container until the overloaded surface beneath suddenly loses its support and sinks under the concentrated weight. Never, ever place fresh concrete or heavy wet material onto an area that has not been properly verified for load capacity and structural support. Wet mix introduces a concentrated live load to the slab, and that weight can increase rapidly within a small, localized area. If the deck or formwork below is not capable of carrying that load, the support system fails and the surface drops immediately. The bucket wasn't the failure point, the overloaded surface was. Verify the support before adding weight. Beside a tanker truck, a hose connection is carefully opened. When stored, internal pressure is suddenly released, driving material outward into an uncontrolled zone with force. Always confirm that pressure has been fully released before opening or handling any pressurized system. Residual energy can discharge without warning and create sudden uncontrolled release. In a dimly lit parking lot at night, a tall metal scaffold is being moved and reaches an overhead power line, triggering electrical contact that energizes the entire structure instantly. Never, ever move tall conductive equipment near overhead power lines. Even brief or accidental contact can energize the entire structure instantly and create a dangerous situation. When the scaffold makes contact with a live line, electrical current rapidly spreads through the connected metal frame. The current follows the path of least resistance, allowing it to energize the entire structure instantly upon contact. Electricity doesn't hit everyone equally, but it only needs one path. Keep clear of power lines. Every move matters. At a construction site, a suspended roof panel is carefully adjusted into position when its balance suddenly shifts, creating a sharp pivot and an uncontrolled vertical drop. Maintain a clear distance from suspended loads during lifting and positioning. Always stay well outside the designated drop zone and any potential movement path at all times. On a partially demolished structure, cutting rebar removes critical tensile at support, causing the concrete slab to suddenly lose structural integrity and give way under its own weight. He's okay. Plan and carefully control structural cuts. Ensure all loads are properly supported and the cutting sequence is fully verified before removing any reinforcement. Cutting rebar removes the tensile support that helps hold the concrete slab together under stress. Once that internal support is compromised, the slab loses its integrity and collapses under its own weight. Structures don't fail slowly once critical support is gone. Control the cut, or the structure will control the outcome. On an oil field rig floor, the drill string engages and begins rotating, creating continuous torque that steadily draws nearby objects at the edge into its circular motion path. Keep a safe distance from rotating drill components at all times. Only approach when systems are fully stopped, completely isolated, and properly secured. Inside a workshop, oil spills from a raised truck and begins to spread across the floor, reducing friction and turning the once stable surface dangerously unstable without any warning. Approach contaminated or slick floors with caution. Ensure stable footing, maintain awareness, and properly isolate the hazard before stepping into the affected area. Oil creates a thin layer that significantly reduces friction between footwear and the floor surface. With friction greatly reduced, even small or controlled movements can quickly result in a sudden loss of balance. Spills turn stable ground into a hazard instantly. Slow down, secure the area, then act. In a backyard, a crowbar is leveraged against a tightly nailed joint when it suddenly slips free and snaps back rapidly along its release path. Control the release path when applying force with prying tools. Always position yourself well clear of any potential rebound zones to maintain safe control. On a rooftop frame, a large steel truss is carefully adjusted from a ladder when it suddenly shifts and swings across the work area without any warning. Stay clear of the movement path of unsecured structural components. Always position yourself well outside any potential swing zones during adjustment or lifting operations. At a delivery truck, a tall stacked pallet becomes unstable while positioned on the tailgate, when even a slight shift moves its center of mass beyond its base support, causing it to tip outward. Stabilize elevated loads before handling them. Ensure proper balance, secure positioning, and controlled support before guiding or standing anywhere near them. Outside a house, a ladder leans against a wall when it suddenly loses support and drops away from the surface without any warning at all. Ensure ladders are fully secured at both the base and the top before climbing. Always carefully verify stability and proper positioning before putting any weight on them. A ladder stays stable only when sufficient. Base friction and solid top contact keep the load center within its support range. Once that balance begins to shift beyond those points, gravity pulls it outward, causing a rapid and uncontrollable loss of stability. Unsecured ladders don't give warnings. Lock it in place before you climb. On a demolition site near a hillside, a digger removes critical support from a standing concrete structure when the weakened building suddenly gives way and collapses back into the active work zone. Maintain a safe operating distance when undermining structures. Always position equipment well outside the expected collapse zone before removing any support to avoid exposure to sudden structural failure. Inside a raised dump truck, compacted sand resists unloading as force is applied until a horizontal support bar suddenly snaps under stress and the entire surface gives way. Ensure all support structures and access points are properly load-rated, securely fixed, and fully suitable. For the intended task, avoid relying on temporary, weakened, or improvised footing inside confined equipment at any time. Structural bars under sustained load can fail instantly when stress exceeds their design capacity or when their integrity has been compromised over time. Once the support breaks, stability is immediately lost and gravity drives rapid downward and sliding motion across the inclined surface. When support fails, the surface follows. Unrated structures turn movement into collapse. In a home garage driveway, a four-wheeler carefully climbs narrow ramps into the back of a pickup when the angle suddenly shifts and the machine tips backward off the tailgate. Ensure ramps are securely positioned and maintain smooth, controlled throttle when loading a four-wheeler. Stable setup, proper alignment, and steady input are critical for a safe and controlled ascent. In an industrial yard, a flour tanker truck vents suddenly when a dense, expanding vapor cloud bursts outward and rapidly fills the air around the vehicle in seconds. Move to a safe distance immediately when a tanker begins releasing pressurized vapor. Avoid remaining in the release zone and follow all established site safety procedures without delay. Pressurized gas expands instantly the moment it is released, rapidly increasing in volume as it escapes containment. This rapid expansion disperses into the surrounding air, forming a fast-moving cloud that can quickly spread and envelop the entire area. What you can't see can surround you fast. Create distance the moment pressure releases. In a home driveway, multiple wooden wall frames stand upright but unsecured when one suddenly loses stability and falls forward as its balance shifts beyond its narrow base support. Secure and properly brace all raised frames before moving on to the next. Unsecured structures can quickly lose stability without warning and shift out of position. At a demolition site, an excavator grips part of a brick structure and begins to pull. When the applied force suddenly exceeds the attachment's limits and the jaw breaks loose mid-pull, operate within equipment limits and carefully match applied force to the attachment's rated capacity. Overloading can lead to sudden and uncontrolled failure during operation. Excavator attachments are engineered with specific load and stress limits based on their design and materials. When the applied force exceeds those limits, structural failure can occur at critical connection or pivot points, causing the attachment to give way. More force doesn't mean more control. Respect equipment limits to keep operations stable. Inside a room, a leaking pipe is temporarily blocked with a cloth. When the internal pressure suddenly builds up and forces water outward in all directions with increasing intensity, shut off and fully control the source before attempting to manage a pressurized leak. Improvised or temporary fixes cannot withstand sustained internal pressure and will fail under continued force. On a rain-soaked loading ramp, a flatbed surface becomes dangerously slick, where secure footing suddenly disappears and traction is lost without any warning at all. Do ensure stable footing and use slip-resistant surfaces or appropriate footwear when working on wet loading areas. Don't step onto slick platforms without proper control and awareness. Water forms a thin layer that reduces friction between footwear and smooth metal surfaces, drastically lowering available grip. Once friction drops below the level needed for stability, control is lost instantly, making the surface difficult to recover on. Wet surfaces don't warn, you lose grip instantly. Slow down, secure footing, or stay off. Inside a confined construction space, a small raised platform becomes increasingly crowded as ceiling panels are installed. When limited space, shifting positions, and uneven balance begin to create instability across the entire surface. Maintain adequate space and strictly respect load limits on work platforms. Ensure stable footing, proper positioning, and safe, controlled movement for every worker at all times. Inside a warehouse, a forklift lifts a tall rack of stacked tires when the elevated load suddenly tilts and collapses downward in one uncontrolled motion. Ensure loads are evenly stacked, properly secured, and well balanced before lifting. Unstable or uneven loads can shift unexpectedly, lose support, and become unstable as they are raised. On a roadside site, a crane lifts a large billboard panel high into the air when the tall structure suddenly tilts off alignment and begins to give way under its own weight. Stabilize the base and maintain proper load balance throughout the entire lifting process. Large structures require controlled support, precise positioning, and continuous monitoring to prevent sudden instability or uncontrolled movement. As the crane raises the panel, the load creates a high center of gravity, along with increasing lateral torque. If the base or supporting points cannot effectively counter that moment, the entire structure begins to pivot and falls under its own weight. Big loads don't just fall, they rotate. With force, stability must be controlled before lifting. At a residential construction site, wet concrete is pumped through a hose when the pressurized line suddenly shifts position and forces material outward with uncontrolled force. Maintain a safe distance from pressurized concrete hoses and stay out of the direct line of force. Ensure the line is properly controlled, firmly secured, and continuously monitored at all times. On a rural road, a heavily loaded truck enters a sharp turn at speed when centrifugal force builds and shifts the center of gravity beyond the wheels, causing the entire vehicle to roll over. Reduce speed well before entering sharp turns with heavy loads. Maintain full control and account for shifting weight to prevent any loss of stability during the maneuver. As the truck turns, centrifugal force pushes the load outward, increasing lateral pressure on the vehicle. If speed is too high, that outward force shifts the center of gravity beyond the wheels, removing stability and causing a rollover. Speed and weight don't mix in a turn. Slow down before the curve. At an active industrial site, a crane lifts a large water tank high into the air when the suspended load suddenly begins to swing and loses alignment mid-air. Control load movement during lifting operations by using proper rigging and tag lines. Maintain consistent alignment and overall stability throughout the lift to prevent any uncontrolled swing or sudden shifting. On a balcony, a worker leans in close to weld a metal railing, positioning too tightly between the bars, when movement suddenly becomes restricted and withdrawal is no longer possible once the position locks in. Maintain safe body clearance and carefully plan your working position before starting. Always ensure you have enough space to move freely without restriction at any point during the task. Confined spaces create fixed geometry that does not allow easy movement once force, posture, or positioning begins to change. After welding, even slight shifts or increased body tension can make the gap effectively smaller, preventing any easy withdrawal or repositioning. If you can barely fit in, you might not get out. Always work with an exit path in mind. On a roadside job, a crane lifts a large concrete mixer drum from a truck. When the suspended load suddenly loses balance and drops under its own weight in a single motion, maintain a safe working distance from suspended loads during lifting operations. Always stay clear of the designated drop zone and any potential movement or swing path at all times. On a city street, large tempered glass panels are unloaded from a truck when the tall stack suddenly tips and collapses outward in one rapid motion. Never, ever unload large vertical panels without proper support. Stabilize and fully control the load before any release or movement begins. Tall panels have a high center of gravity, causing them to behave like a single unstable mass. When stacked together, once the balance point shifts even slightly past the base, gravity takes over and accelerates the entire stack forward with no chance of recovery. Tall loads fall fast once they lean. Control the base before you move the load. Inside a concrete structure, an overhead pipe is being adjusted from a ladder when pressurized water suddenly releases downward from above with unexpected force. Isolate and fully release pressure before working on overhead lines. Ensure systems are completely depressurized and properly verified as safe to prevent any sudden and uncontrolled discharge. At a busy yard, a loaded hand truck begins moving down a metal ramp when the heavy load suddenly shifts forward and the cart surges out of control with increasing speed. Control heavy loads on ramps from the uphill side. Maintain proper positioning, a firm grip, and controlled movement to effectively manage speed, balance, and overall stability during descent. Gravity pulls the load downward along the ramp, steadily increasing forward momentum as it moves. Pushing from behind reduces control and leverage, allowing the load to accelerate beyond controlled movement once its balance begins to shift. Downhill turns weight into force. Stay behind control, not behind the load. On a rough dirt work site, a worker cuts through a steel beam using a welding machine when the long section suddenly releases built-up tension without any warning. Secure and stabilize both sides of metal under tension before cutting. An uncontrolled release can lead to sudden, forceful, and unpredictable movement. At a busy loading dock, boxes sit loosely stacked at the back of a truck when the vehicle suddenly pulls forward and the unsecured load immediately shifts and spills out instantly. Secure and properly stabilize all cargo before moving a vehicle. Use appropriate restraints, barriers, or tie-downs to prevent any shifting, sliding, or falling during motion. When the truck accelerates forward, inertia causes the load to resist the change in motion and lag behind. Without proper restraints in place, gravity and motion combine, causing the cargo to slide backward and fall out of the truck. If it's not secured, it's already moving. Lock the load before you roll. Inside a confined room, stacked paint buckets are arranged to form a narrow, unstable base. When even slight movement shifts the center of gravity, causing the entire structure to tip and collapse. Use proper ladders or scaffolding for elevated work. Makeshift platforms like stacked buckets are inherently unstable and can fail suddenly under weight, pressure, or even small movements. At a roadside workshop, a three-wheeled scooter is left standing on a slight slope. Then it begins rolling on its own, gradually gaining momentum and moving uncontrolled straight into the surrounding structure. Never, ever leave moving equipment unsecured on uneven or open ground. Always stabilize it properly, or block the wheels to prevent any unintended movement. Even a slight slope is enough for gravity to overcome friction and turn stationary equipment into motion. Once the scooter starts rolling, momentum builds quickly, making sudden impacts harder to stop or bring under control. If it can roll, it will move. Secure it before it secures itself. In a busy, fast-moving loading yard, a worker uses a forklift to arrange stacked crates. When the elevated load suddenly topples forward without any warning, keep loads low and stable while repositioning with a forklift. Avoid raising or tilting elevated loads during movement to maintain full control, proper balance, and load stability at all times. Inside a busy workshop, a car is lifted on a two-post hoist. Then it suddenly slips and drops off the lift arms after a sudden tug disrupts its balance. Position lift arms correctly and carefully verify secure, solid contact points before raising a vehicle. Proper balance, alignment, and even weight distribution are essential for stable lifting. If the lift arms are misaligned or not evenly placed, the vehicle's center of gravity shifts outside the intended support points. Once that stability is compromised, gravity takes over immediately and pulls the vehicle downward without resistance. If it's not balanced, it's already falling. Check the lift before you trust it. On a narrow staircase inside a construction site, a team carefully carries a large, fragile glass panel upward step by step when it suddenly slips from their grip and breaks under its own weight. Use proper lifting equipment or stabilization tools when moving large, fragile materials on stairs. Manual handling alone can quickly lead to loss of control, instability, and breakage. At a busy construction site, long steel beams are carefully loaded onto the back of a pickup truck. When they suddenly begin to slide backward and slam into the rear of the truck bed without any warning, never ever transport long materials without proper rear restraints in place. Secure the load against both forward and backward movement at all times. When the vehicle begins to accelerate, inertia causes the load to resist the change in motion and lag behind. Without any rear blocking or restraint, the beams start to slide backward, transferring force directly into the truck bed and tailgate as momentum builds. Load moves opposite your motion. Secure it in every direction. Inside a cluttered, tightly packed workshop, two workers lift a heavy metal sheet. When it suddenly shifts in their hands and drops, throwing the entire load off balance in a single instant. Never, ever manually handle heavy, unstable loads without a firm, secure grip, stable and well-positioned footing, and clear, coordinated communication between everyone involved. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insight could save a life. Take care.